Welcome to everybody. The Lighthouse Guild has a long recognized excellence in vision research. And our awards and lectures have honored excellence in translating research into treatment and rehabilitation. The efforts of the award recipients directly contribute to Lighthouse Guild's mission of providing services that inspire people who are visually impaired to attain their goals. As our mission has evolved, so have our recognitions. Now, not only do our awards and lectures honor excellence in translating research into treatment and rehabilitation, they include technological innovation and leadership in advocacy for people with vision loss. So today, we have three extraordinary pioneers in their fields that will present work that is changing the lives of people who are blind and visually impaired. The first presentation is by Haben Girma, recipient of the Dr. Alan Morse Lecture in Advocacy. This lecture is named for Dr. Alan R. Morse, Lighthouse Guild's President Emeritus, for his years of dedicated leadership of Lighthouse Guild and his tireless advocacy for people who have vision loss. The lecture was established this year, 2022, to acknowledge individuals who, through leadership, raising awareness, and addressing barriers, are working to make a world where no person is limited by their sensory capacity. We are thrilled to have Haben Girma join us today. Ms. Girma is a noted human rights lawyer and disability justice advocate. She is also the first deafblind graduate from Harvard Law School, an author, and a frequent speaker on accessibility, diversity, and leadership. It is my pleasure to introduce the 2022 Dr. Alan Morse Lecture in Advocacy recipient, Haben Girma.
Good afternoon. My name is Haben Girma. I'm honored to be here. It is such a rewarding experience to have my advocacy recognized, especially by Lighthouse Guild. When I was a high school student, I was trying to figure out how I would go to college and what I would do with my life after college. I'm deafblind, and even today, there are very few role models for deafblind people. Lighthouse Guild offered me a scholarship when I was in high school, and that helped me when I was trying to figure out how to get through college. And I have stories about college that I'm going to be sharing. But first, I want to talk about communication. The deaf-blind community is very, very diverse. Lots of different ways of engaging with the world. Some people voice, some people sign, some people use computer-assisted communication. I'm doing a combination. So I'm voicing, but to know what is being said, I'm reading from my Braille computer. And I'll hold it up. I'm holding up a device that's called a Braille note. There's a Braille note here as well as other Braille displays that I was checking out earlier. So as people speak, like when we were having the introductions, what's being said is typed on the computer, on an external computer, and the letters pop up in Braille. I feel it. So during the introduction and during my speech, I'm getting feedback on what's happening through my Braille computer. The interpreters let me know when people are smiling, laughing, falling asleep. They're watching you. This is just one of many different communication techniques we come up with. Deaf blind people want to be connected with the world, and deaf blindness doesn't need to be the barrier. If we come up with solutions, whether it's keyboards or other solutions, we can find ways to engage with our community. There are still so many people who think my life is limited because of deaf blindness. When I was growing up, people were telling my parents, poor thing, she'll never go to school, she'll never get a job. My parents are from Eritrea and Ethiopia. When they came to the US, they didn't know about Braille or sign language or even Helen Keller. There were a lot of unknowns. We were in the San Francisco Bay Area, which happened to be one of the hearts of the disability rights movement. And there were teachers to explain Braille and sign language, skiing, river rafting. I learned there's an alternative technique for just about every strategy. There was a program to teach me surfing, another program to teach me how to use computers, introduction to mathematics and sciences, and I attended mainstream public schools. So I was taught early on that deaf blindness didn't have to be the barrier. I worked hard and graduated valedictorian from high school. I went to college at Lewis and Clark in Portland, Oregon. And lots of students around me were getting jobs in the summer. Summer jobs are a way to get a sense of what career you might want to do after college. No one wanted to hire a deaf-blind person. I really wanted to get a job. So I networked, talked with friends, and I learned from a friend. He told me, I know where you can get a job. Alaska. I really did want a job. So I went up to Alaska, and they were right. There were lots of job openings in Juneau, Alaska. Tourists come up to see the eagles, the whales, the glaciers. Employers were impressed with my resume, with my volunteer experiences and my grades in school. So they'd call me in for an interview. But as soon as they realized I'm disabled, they'd come up with all kinds of excuses not to hire me. These were tactile jobs, jobs that do not require sight. Washing dishes in restaurants, folding laundry in hotels. When I was a kid, I told my parents blind people can't do dishes. They didn't believe me. So I had lots of experience in this field. But employers still assumed that you have to be sighted to do dishes, and they would not hire me. If I couldn't even get a job as a dishwasher, what could I imagine for the rest of my life? How would I ever get a job after college? There were a lot of unknowns. Through the disability rights movement, I realized the problem here is not deaf blindness. I absolutely could wash dishes and do laundry. My disability was not the problem. It was ableism that was the problem. ABLEISM. Ableism is a system of practices and beliefs that treat disabled people as inferior to non-disabled people. It's the assumptions hiring managers think. It's the assumptions in schools that disabled kids can't learn. And also it's assumptions in our healthcare system that disabled people's lives are not worth living. There was a study that showed that 80% of people in the medical field assume that disabled people's lives are worse than our lives actually are. That's ableism. And it's so deeply embedded that a lot of people don't notice. And even disabled people, we internalize ableism because it's so widespread. Once I started to realize that ableism exists and that was the real problem, that felt so liberating. I started to imagine more possibilities for myself. If someone didn't want me my friend, I realized ableism has a factor there. If someone didn't want to hire me, I realized ableism caused them to think blind people can't work in all kinds of fields, where in fact we can work. And many of us have been working for many years. So I explained ableism. I also want to explain my use of the word disabled. Some people use other terms like special needs, differently abled, euphemisms, tiptoeing around a concept actually perpetuates discrimination. We can talk about other identities. We can say woman, yet when we say disability, there's still so much discomfort. The word isn't the problem. It's the shame and the discomfort that's the problem. And we can push past that shame. A lot of activists nowadays are reclaiming the word and using identity-first language rather than person-first language. Person-first is more cumbersome and takes longer rather than just saying identity. For example, it takes longer to say person who is blind compared to blind person. So some activists are reclaiming the word disabled and using identity-first language, which is what I'm doing. So back in Alaska, I could not get that dishwashing job, and thank goodness. I kept trying, and eventually through friends, I found a hiring manager who asked me how I would do the job. I explained my alternative techniques. She listened, and then she hired me to work the front desk of her small gym in Juneau, Alaska. That summer, I learned a lot about gym equipment. One day, a woman came to the front desk and said, "A treadmill isn't working." I followed her to the front desk. I followed her to the treadmill, and I felt the machine from top to bottom. Near the bottom, there was a switch. I flicked the switch, and the machine brought to life. She told me, "Oh my goodness, I didn't see that switch." I told her I didn't see it either. Sometimes tactile techniques beat visual techniques. If you can't read with your eyes, you can learn to read with your fingers. If you can't see a button, you could find a button with your fingers. And we need employers and teachers and all of us in our communities to recognize that alternative techniques are equal in value to mainstream techniques. Let's be aware of ableism and learn to resist ableism. Since then, I've expanded my imagination and possibilities of what I could do. I still wasn't sure what I would do after college, but I knew that there were people out there who resist ableism and would actually listen to me when I explained how I would do a job. Lewis and Clark had a fantastic disability resource program. They provided me all my books in Braille, so I had access to all my textbooks. The exams were in Braille. When I arrived, they never had a Braille reader before, but they embraced the opportunity to learn about Braille, and the reading specialist took time to learn how to convert print to Braille, and they bought a Braille embosser. They got Braille translation software. So the day I started, she started producing Braille so that I could have access to all my textbooks and course materials. There was just one problem. The college cafeteria menu was only in print. Sighted students could browse the menu and then go to their station of choice. As a blind vegetarian, I need access to food information. It was really hard to know which station to go to when I didn't have access to the menus. I went to the manager and I explained, I can't read the print menu, but if you provide the menu in Braille or post it online or email it to me, I have computers that allow me to read accessible emails and websites. The manager said, we're very busy. We have over 1,000 students. We don't have time to do special things for students with special needs. Just to be clear, eating is not a special need. There's this myth that non-disabled people are independent and disabled people are dependent. It's not true. We're all interdependent. Many of you like drinking coffee. Very few of you grow your own coffee beans. You depend on other people to harvest the beans. And we need to be honest about the fact that every single one of us are interdependent. We all need each other. We all need community. The cafeteria manager didn't seem to understand this, and I was stuck not having access to the menu. This went on for months. There were about 6 different stations. I'd go to one at random, wait in line, get a plate, find a table, try the food. There were some unpleasant surprises. I told myself, just be grateful. Millions of people around the world struggle for food. Who was I to complain? My mother, when she was my age, was a refugee in Sudan. Who was I to complain? Maybe this was a lesson that disabled people should get used to inferior services. I talked to friends. I did research online. And then I went back to the cafeteria manager and explained, the Americans with Disabilities Act prohibits discrimination against students with disabilities. If you don't provide access to the menu, I'm going to take legal action. I had no idea how to do that. I was 19. I couldn't afford a lawyer. Now I know there are nonprofit legal centers helping students with disabilities. But back then I didn't know that. All I knew was I had to try. I had to do something. The next day, the manager apologized and promised to make the menus accessible. They started emailing the menus on time in accessible formats, so I could read it on my Braille computer. And if the email said Station 4, cheese tortellini, I could use my white cane and navigate all the way to Station 4. Life became delicious. The next year, there was a new blind student at the college. He had immediate access to the menus. That taught me when I advocate, even if it's seemingly small things like menus, it helps other students. There are a lot of small barriers in our community that we quietly tolerate. Barriers impacting women, people of color, disabled people. When we take the time to address a small barrier, we build up the skills to master the larger obstacles. I wanted to build up my skills, and law school would be a way to build up those skills. I reached out to law schools. Harvard Law told me they've never had a deafblind student before. I told them I've never been to Harvard Law School before. We didn't have the answers of how exactly I would take the classes and get access to the internships, but we engaged in an interactive process to find the solutions. Try one thing, if it didn't work, try another thing. That was not always the case for Harvard. Helen Keller was brilliant. She really wanted to go to Harvard, but they said no. Back then, they only admitted men. Her disability didn't hold her back. Her gender didn't hold her back. It was the community that chose to exclude women. Over time, the community at Harvard changed and opened its doors to women, people of color, and disabled people. I was the first deaf-blind student at Harvard Law School because Harvard had finally changed enough and resisted ableism enough to make that possible. A lot of people ask me, what is the hardest thing at Harvard Law School? The hardest thing was ableism. It's still happening. I attended a training workshop during my first semester, and I was standing near the center of the room. My Braille computer was on the table. The interpreter was on the other side of the table, typing descriptions of what was going on. And there were attorneys from the Boston area there to talk to students about job opportunities. I asked for one of the attorneys to come over. He came over. He would not talk to me. He only spoke to the interpreter. He told her, "Wow, what a beautiful dog. Does the dog go to class with her? That must be a smart dog." And I spoke up and I said, "I'm deaf-blind. I'm reading everything you're saying in Braille, and the interpreter is typing it. I know this can be a little confusing. Would you like to try typing? Maybe it'll make sense if you try typing." And again, he would not talk to me. He only spoke to the interpreter. "I've enjoyed watching you too. Tell her she's very inspiring." And he walked away. He was not inspired to offer me a job. A lot of non-disabled people, when they're feeling nervous and uncomfortable around disabled people, they call us inspiring. And a lot of disabled people are uncomfortable with the term because it's so often associated with that awkwardness, discomfort, and pity. I like the word inspiring if it's used for action. If someone says, "I'm inspired to make my cafeteria menus accessible," or "I'm inspired to increase hiring of disabled people," that is positive inspiration. Harvard is still struggling with ableism. Our whole society actually is still struggling with ableism. And that includes disabled people who struggle with internalized ableism. Ableism is really one of the biggest factors impacting our access to education, healthcare, and quality of life. And I'm going to keep working to help address ableism, educate people to notice it, so more people can join me in the movement of fighting ableism. and creating more opportunities for blind and disabled people. Thank you again for having me here and recognizing me for this award. Thank you, everyone.
In 1981, the Pisart Award was established to recognize an individual, group of individuals, or organization that has made significant contributions to the field of science. The award has evolved to recognize those whose technological innovations improve the lives of people with vision loss, now called the Pisart Award in Technological Innovation. Javier Pita Lozano is the recipient of the 2022 Pisart Award. He is the CEO of Navalens, a solution whose objective is to increase the autonomy, social inclusion, and quality of life of people who are visually impaired. The technology marries labeling information with orientation guidance to increase accessibility of public spaces and transportation infrastructure. Navalens' system of 4-color QR-like codes is inexpensive, easily printed, simple to store information on, and thanks to special computer vision algorithms for smartphone cameras, easy for a blind user to access with their phones. We have installed Navalens codes all over Lighthouse Guild and used them ourselves to great results. I am pleased to introduce the 2022 Pisart Award in Technological Innovation recipient, Javier Pita Lozano.
Thank you so much. I cannot describe enough English words the happiness that I have. Okay, oh no, you are hearing me. I have a strong accent from Europe. I'm from Spain, but I cannot deliver. Okay, how happy I am to be here in the Lighthouse Guild and receiving this award. And hopefully you like the work that we are doing for the last 10 years now, and that I'm going to introduce at this moment. So, okay. Perfect. I think that I need to start the presentation. Okay. It's possible to press the presentation, please. Okay. Okay, thank you so much. Okay, so Navalens, empowering the visually impaired. Again, okay. Okay. In the world, there are almost 300 million people that are visually impaired. 39 are blind, and almost 250 has low vision or is partly sighted. So the challenge is that the visually impaired people are not completely independent in unknown spaces. Like, for example, the first time that one user visits this space. So, and one of the reasons is because the signage is not accessible for blind users. So fully sighted people use the signage in order to move across one new unfamiliar space. So this happens in all kinds of facilities. Happen in train stations, hotels, public buildings, malls, hospitals, everywhere. So our idea was, okay, why don't put something on the signage, use the camera of the mobile phone to read it? And our first approach was to use QR codes. Did you know that the QR codes was invented in Japan 28 years ago? Did you know that? Me neither, at the beginning of the project. And the problem with the QR codes is that it's not possible to read from far away. You need to focus and frame where exactly is the QR code. So we decided to invest in a long process of research and development between our company and the University of Alicante to create a new kind of QR code that could be read by a blind user. And after these 5 years of research between 2012 and 2017, we create a new kind of QR code that can be read up 40 feet away without need to focus or frame. Well, this is the description of the Navalens code, and I have here something tactile that is the reason that I went there, that describe how the code is for a blind user. And I'm going to give, okay, to Oh no, it's okay. So the thing, the code is a white external border, okay, that is white, an internal border that is black, and some cells inside, okay, some cells inside the code that are using colors instead of black and white as the QR code. Doing that, we can store more information and we can make the cell bigger in order to read from more distance. So the unique value is that it's possible to read the code at a very long distance, an incredible angle, and very, very quickly. So the first was the validation for the users. It's very important for a project. And we work with ONCE, ONCE, that is the National Visual Impaired Organization in Spain. And we create this space accessible for a blind. Imagine a trade show is super difficult because there are a lot of booths. And we made this printing a code in a piece of paper, adding at each one of the booths, and the users were able to navigate independently in that space. Indeed, the feedback of the user was, this is amazing, this must be everywhere. And we start working in several use cases. We're working in a lot of different challenges, as for example, menu accessibility, like a fact, not a thing that we need to achieve. But I would like to focus today in transit use case because mobility is key for a blind user. So if a blind user, for example, navigates in Barcelona, this is a picture of Barcelona, and want to go from one position to locate a particular bus stop, the users are going to use a GPS app and in order to locate the bus stop. But the problem is that the GPS is not accurate enough, and the users doesn't know exactly where the bus stop is because GPS has an error, especially here in New York with very high skyscrapers that you have. So in Barcelona, we started working on this, adding the navigance code at each one of the bus stops. Look, it's a sticker, it's a piece of vinyl that you can put on the bus stop. And doing that, adding the sticker on the bus stop, we can solve the last few yards wayfinding problem, where exactly to locate exactly that bus stop. Indeed, if I read the code from here, I open the Navigance app with my camera. I don't need to focus exactly where it is, okay? And automatically, I'm going to know where exactly is.
Activating 360 vision 35 feet away. Bus stop.
And I can exactly know where the code is.
Ahead.
Okay, and I can go.
Barcelona bus stop. Gran Via Plaza España. Upcoming arrivals. Line H12 pesos for need of 3 minutes.
Okay. We don't have enough time to get to Barcelona and get into that to that bus, okay? Because this is real-time information. So doing this, okay, adding a simple sticker to the bus stop, we can make that bus stop accessible for visual impaired users in order to locate and receive audio information about the next departures of that buses. And one technology that serves everybody. So the fully sighted people can use that, pointing to the code and having the real-time information. And very important, in 34 languages. So when you go to Barcelona, you don't need to read in Catalan or not in Spanish, okay? So you can read and access to information in your own language, reading the Navigance codes. And I'm super proud to be here because with the support of the Lighthouse Guild and the MTA, this technology is being implemented in this incredible city. This is a picture of the presentation of the Navigance codes at 23rd Street in Manhattan. And look, adding the code, okay, to the bus stop, make that bus stop possible to locate by a blind user. That is super difficult. Okay, so think about this. It's a bus pole that is very thin and it's very difficult to locate exactly where the bus stop is. And the thing is that technology that want to create a more inclusive world needs to be easy to implement. Because if not, okay, we cannot solve the accessibility problem for the visually impaired people. So, and the idea of Navigance is simple. You see at the left the original version of the bus stop developed here in Manhattan. By the way, congratulations for the people from the Department of Transportation for thinking about navigance 30 or 40 years ago to put an empty space to add the navigance code there. Okay, and the thing is that it's possible to make those bus stops accessible as simple as adding the signage into the element. So it's a simple solution. So indeed, the demonstration that I have shown here with the sounds, it was developed here for this particular use case because it's very challenging to locate a bus stop in New York. But this is universal design. This technology pretends to be useful for everybody because how many of the people that is inside speaks German? Do you speak German? No? No one? Okay. So you cannot understand this signage that is in German. So if you travel to Germany and you see this, you are not able to access to the information. You are not blind, but you cannot access to the information. So adding the navigance code, our idea is that adding this, if you read the code, you will be able to access to the information. This signage, it was put at the beginning of the pandemic, okay? Something like 3 years ago. Let's take a look.
9 feet away. Help stop the spread of the coronavirus. 1. Wash your hands regularly for at least 20 seconds.
Okay. This mobile phone speaks very well German. Very good job. So the thing is, it's possible to speak German, French, Spanish, Japanese, Vietnamese. So the idea is universal design. The same technology that helped blind users in order to read and access to one specific information help everybody. And indoor GPS is more difficult, okay? So imagine in this building, how to solve the accessibility in an indoor building or a train station or subway, because it's very difficult. Please think about this. When you navigate through a single subway station here, it's super complicated. So our vision is to use the navigance code and to make the signage accessible, adding the code to describe the signage where the code is. Barcelona tested the system with 20 blind users, and the result was incredible. And one result was very interesting. 94 of the users stated that they had found things with navigance that they had not been able to locate before. They discovered the intercom buttons, for example. And when they navigate through the ONCE, the equivalent of the Lighthouse in Barcelona, they discovered a sofa in one place that they never found that sofa. So, because, okay, imagine, and it's super useful for that. And the 80% of the users were totally in favor of extending navigance to more locations, to more subway stations, and the 12% declared much in favor. So it was an incredible success. And Barcelona implemented in all the system-wide 161 subway stations and 2,600 bus stops. Okay, that scaling the implementation. So if you go to Barcelona, please remember, okay, this moment, and you will see that. And we are implementing this across the world. This is Bilbao in the north of Spain. This is like another part of Spain. Okay, so that is called Bilbao. And navigance is implemented across the world. In Australia, Japan, Singapore, Europe, in a lot of places. You're here in Newark, New Jersey, in Philadelphia, in San Antonio. They are going to implement across all the bus stops in San Antonio, Texas, Los Angeles, and many other places. For example, here we have a picture of Paris, okay, with the navigance code and everything. Here is a picture of the London Underground with the navigance code there. And I love this photo. It's a photo from Kobe in Japan with a navigance code on the floor using tactile paving. That is really incredible. And I suggest to the previous awarded that think about this and push the legislation here in the United States to add tactile paving and train stations that are super useful for the users. And here we are, again, in New York, in this time in Brooklyn, at J Street. And MTA implemented this in J Street with the mission of helping blind users to read the signage, helping busy New Yorkers to have access to next train departures in real time and check if the service status is okay, and navigate indoors. If I read this code, you can see the information, okay, the information that is in this signage, but a blind user cannot. So if I read from this,
12 feet away, stair entrance to J Street Metro Tech Station. Access to mezzanine for our service. Access to ACF service via our platform. Elevator to ACF and our mezzanine at NW corner of J Street and Willoughby Street.
when I introduce to that, for example, I can locate where the elevators are.
10 feet away, elevator down to our platform. Train arrivals, uptown, line R, Forest Hill 71F, 2 minutes. Line R,
Okay.
Forest Hill 71F.
And it's connected with the real-time services of MTA in order to know when the next train is departing, because they are not announcing, and it's very challenging for a blind user. And when we have arrived to the platform,
6 feet away, warning, watch the platform gap. Manhattan and Queens bound F on the left side of the platform. Manhattan bound AC on the right side of the platform.
as simple as that. So it's simple, it's scalable. So the thing is, it's very important to achieve a more accessible world for blind users. And in the same way that we see the ESIC signs everywhere, why not see the evidence code to make a more inclusive world for everybody? So thank you so much. And I'm really, really a pleasure to receive this award in behalf of the Naviance team. Thank you so much.
Since 2003, the Bressler Prize annually recognizes an individual whose research has translated medical or scientific knowledge into significant advancements in the treatment of rehabilitation of people with vision loss. The 2022 Bressler Prize recipient is Dr. Sheila Nirenberg for her outstanding advances in applying vision science to the treatment of blindness. Dr. Nirenberg is the Nanette Laitman Professor in Neurology and Neuroscience and a Professor of Computational Neuroscience at the Institute for Computational Biomedicine, Weill Medical College of Cornell University. She is a recipient of the MacArthur Genius Award. She is also the founder of 2 biotechnology companies, Bionic Sight and Nirenberg Neuroscience. Her work in deciphering the retina's neural code, developing a prosthetic to transmit this code, and exploring genetic interventions are key steps to restoring meaningful vision in people who are blind from outer retinal degeneration. We are grateful Dr. Nirenberg could share her life-changing work with us today. It is my pleasure to introduce the 2022 Bressler Award in Vision Science recipient, Dr. Sheila Nirenberg.
So I know it's a mixed audience of scientists and non-scientists. So if I say anything that's unclear, feel free to ask questions along the way. Okay, so a tiny bit of background to add to what Cal was saying. So I'm a neuroscientist, and my research focuses on what's called neural coding. So what we work on is the general question of how the brain takes information from the outside world and encodes it in patterns of electrical pulses, and then how it uses those patterns to allow you to do things, to see, to hear, to reach for an object. So for most of my career, I was just doing basic research. I'd never done anything clinically oriented. And then about 6 or 7 years, I started to switch over and to take what we're learning about these patterns of pulses and apply it to medical problems. And what we've been focusing on specifically, as you all know, is the development of a new kind of treatment for blindness caused by retinal degenerative diseases. Okay, so let me start with an outline of what I'm going to tell you about. So I'll start by reminding you very briefly how a normal retina works in the context of this idea of neural coding. Then I'll run through what happens when a patient gets a retinal degenerative disease. Then I'll tell you about how our treatment works, including showing you some animal data. And finally, I'll get to the first clinical results, the results with our first several patients. So we're still at the early stages, but I think we have a foot in the door, and I really want to show you. Okay, so let me start in on the retina. Just get coordinated with this. Okay, so here's a retina. And I'm not sure if you can see that pointer, sort of. Okay, you have a retina, you have an image, a retina, and a brain. So when you look at something like this image here, this image of this baby's face. It goes into your eye and it lands on your retina, on the input cells, the photoreceptors. Then what happens is the retinal circuitry, the part in the middle, starts to process it. What it does is it performs operations on it, it extracts information from it, and it converts that information into a code. And the code is in the form of these patterns of electrical pulses that get sent up to the brain. Okay, but the key thing is an image ultimately gets converted into this code. And when I say code, I do literally mean code. So like this pattern of pulses actually means this baby's face. So when the brain receives this pattern, it knows that what was out there was a baby's face. If it got a different pattern, it would know that what was out there was, say a dog, or another pattern would be a house. Anyway, you get the idea. And of course, in real time, in real life, it's changing all the time. It's a dynamic process. So these patterns of pulses are changing all the time because the world you're looking at is changing all the time too. So it's a pretty complicated thing. Patterns of pulses coming out of your eye every millisecond, telling your brain what it is you're seeing. Okay, so what happens when a patient gets a retinal degenerative disease? As you know, the photoreceptors start to die. And over time, all the cells and the circuits that are connected to them, they start to die too. But the output cells, the ganglion cells, remain intact. So the ones that are sending the signals to the brain remain intact. But because of all this degeneration, they're not sending any signals anymore. They're not getting any inputs, so there aren't very many or any signals to send. So a person's brain no longer gets any visual information. That means he or she is blind. Okay, so a solution to the problem then would be to build a device that could mimic the actions of this retinal circuitry and drive these ganglion cells, these output cells, so they can go back to their normal job of sending signals to the brain. So this is what we've been working on and what our system does. So let me just show you it schematically. It consists of two parts, what we call an encoder and a transducer. So the encoder does just what I was saying. It mimics the actions of that retinal circuitry, that front-end retinal circuitry. That is, it takes an image and it converts it into the retina's code. And this is just done through a mathematical transformation that I worked out that we implemented on a chip. Okay, and then the transducer, as I was saying, sends the code on up to the brain. And the combination of these two things, the encoder and the transducer, creates a system that can produce normal retinal output. So a completely blind retina, even one with no photoreceptors at all, can now send out normal signals the brain can understand. So you can't see this underneath, but I wanted, just pause for 1 second before you keep the typing going. This transducer, I want to just tell you a little bit about it. It's a specific one called an optogenetic transducer. Oops, I can't. I'll just tell you. Yeah, there, optogenetic transducer. Okay, and what it is it's a light-sensitive molecule that when it receives light, it will send out a voltage pulse. Okay, so we designed the encoder so it will send out the code in the form of light pulses to activate the transducer. So the encoder activates the transducer, and the transducer, because it's in the ganglion cells, will allow them to send out neural pulses that closely match what the normal retina does. I think I have a way to animate this, but it's not seeming to happen. But something's wrong with the slides. Can you advance it from? Oh, that guy typed in the in the translation. Is there some way to advance this? I can't. Or my talk is going to end here. Oh, there it goes. Okay, yeah, thank you, wherever that came from. Okay, so the question is, how do we know we got this right? How do we know we really have the code and we can produce normal output? So I'm just going to show you two basic experiments taken from our preclinical data, our animal data, just to give you a feel for it. But I mean, it's been heavily vetted. It's been published and won a MacArthur Award, blah, blah, blah. Let me just show you because a picture is worth a 1,000 words. Okay, so what I'm going to show you are 3 sets of firing patterns. Oops. Okay, so the first one is from a normal retina. So what we did was we took movies of everyday things. We went to Central Park and we took movies of children playing and people walking and trees and park benches. And we presented these movies to a normal retina. Okay, so these are the firing patterns from a normal retina viewing these movies. And you can see it's they produce pretty complicated patterns. Then we showed the same movies to a blind retina. In one case, we treated it just with a transducer. That's sort of the standard way people have tried to do things. And the other way, we treated it with a whole treatment, a combination of the encoder and the transducer. So let me show you the one with the transducer alone first. Okay, so retinal firing patterns from a blind retina treated with just the transducer. And you can see that with a transducer, it will fire. It just doesn't fire in normal firing patterns. You get these sort of bursts, but mostly it's kind of on the sparse side. Okay, what happens if we add the encoder? So now you can see that the firing patterns very closely match a normal retina. And just to emphasize the point, this is from a completely blind retina that has no photoreceptors at all. And now, because we're doing this artificially, we're able to make that retina now fire normally. If I look like I'm going to blind anybody with a pointer, please point it out before I do any damage. Okay. Okay, so we have the code. We can produce normal responses. And I'm emphasizing this is not just a simulation. This is from the actual retina that has the optogenetic gene in it. Okay. Okay, so we have the code. We can produce normal output. How important is this? What's the potential impact in a patient's ability to see? So I'm going to show just one bottom line experiment. It's called a reconstruction experiment. What we did was we took a moment in time from these recordings and we said, what was the patient seeing at that moment in time? Can we reconstruct what the retina was seeing just from these firing patterns? Okay, so we did it for the transducer alone and for the combination. So let me show you. I'll show you the one with the transducer alone first. Okay, so here's the image that's produced if you just have the transducer. And you can see it's pretty limited. And it makes sense that it is, because you saw in the previous slide that the firing patterns were kind of sparse. So if they're missing a lot of those voltage spikes, then they just don't have that much information in them. So when you try to recreate the image, or for the brain to try to create the image from that sparse firing, it's just a crappy image. Okay, here's what it was. This is what the original image is. What happens if you add the retina's neural code? And you can see it's really different. Not only can you tell that it's a baby's face, but you can tell that it's this baby, which is a really challenging task. Okay, so this was exciting. What it means is that if we add the retina's neural code, we can break through the limitations of standard methods like this, maybe all the way up to being able to see faces and objects. Okay, so that's the basic concept. And what I want to do is switch over and tell you about the clinical trial. And remember, we're still at the early stages. The talk it's not like I am all done and I got invited. You get invited to give a talk whenever it happens, and I'll show you the best I've got, okay? So, okay, so the clinical trial, it says clinical trial at the top, is the treatment. Starts with a gene therapy to deliver the transducer, the optogenetic gene, into the patient's eye. So to get it into the ganglion cells. And this is just a single injection that's done in a doctor's office, so nothing complicated. Second part is goggles, which provide the encoder. So it looks something like this. Okay, the goggles here, and then I just made it little green dots just to convey the idea that there's something in the eye to receive it. And for the first, as we started the trial, for the first one, we're just using one pair of goggles that we have mounted on a bench. And so the patients look into it and then they press on a console below to answer the questions. And of course, because of COVID, I announced it. Of course, we clean it every time between patients. Okay, so let's move on to the results. So the first key question is, does the transducer, this optogenetic gene, get in and can we drive it? This is really important because while having the neural code is nice, it doesn't have any therapeutic value. We can't actually get it into the retina. Okay, so that was the first question. Is the optogenetic gene part working? And can we drive it? And the answer is yes. So the first indication, I put the exclamation point because that's really how we felt. When you're doing engineering, doing the code, you have more control over what you're doing. When you're working with biology, you inject this thing in maybe the whole thing could have failed. There's just no way to know. But I'm very happy to say that the gene got in. And the first indication that it did was that the patients, from their own observation, 6 to 8 weeks after they were injected, they started calling and texting us to say that they could sense more light coming into the treated eye. And because these are very blind patients, it was very noticeable to them that this was happening. So one patient was telling us that he could see the Hanukkah candles. So when he walked into his dining room and on the 8th day of Hanukkah, he could see, my slides keep advancing in spite of me. Okay, that he could see the Hanukkah candles. Another patient said that he could see his dog running in the snow. He couldn't see the details of the dog, but he could follow the dog. You know, it's a high contrast situation, a dark dog in white snow. Another one who was trying to do martial arts. He could see his instructor's white robe against the blue mat. Okay, so then, you know, this was promising. And then after 3 months after the injection, the patients are brought into the lab, into our vision testing lab, to assess this formally and quantitatively. Okay, so it's what it says at the top is assessing light sensitivity. Okay, and so these are the results this is from February. And these are with the lower doses and patients with very advanced blindness. The reason it's with the lower doses is, as probably everyone knows, you know, for many clinical trials, you have to start with the lowest dose. And if nothing bad happens, you go to the next dose and then the next dose. So these are our first patients. So by definition, they are the lower doses patients. Okay, and so what we're assessing here is how much more sensitive to light. They said they were sensitive. Let's see if it was really happening. And again, the initial treatment is, of course, on the most blind patients. Okay, so there's one more that's underneath that. But anyway, okay, so you can see that. So on the left in blue is baseline before treatment, and then something weird's happened with the slides, but this is after treatment in red. Okay, so blue is before treatment, red is after, and you can see in every case the patients was able to see much more light sensitive. Okay, and just to orient you, this is light intensity on the y-axis, and it's on a log scale. So it's spanning several orders of magnitude, so several factors of 10, from TV light at the top, outdoor daylight in the middle, and very bright tungsten filament in a light bulb at the bottom. Okay, so each circle here indicates a block of 10 trials. So this is not one trial, each one is 10. If it's filled, it means the patient got it right 80% of the time. If it's unfilled, less than 80%. 80% or more, unfilled is less than 80%. Okay, so as I was saying, they're very advanced blindness. So most of the patients couldn't see anything but the very brightest light. And even then, not so reliable because these are unfilled circles. But after treatment, it's so much more. Because it's a log scale, this is, 3 lines above. So 1,000 times, just this one was 1,000 times more sensitive to light. And the encouraging thing is that it lasted. Okay, so some patients got better over time. Some patients just held steady. And these 2 patients still have to come in for their follow-ups. Okay, so light sensitivity, but what else can they do? What about secondary endpoints? So the FDA still wanted us to start on light sensitivity, but we can add other endpoints also. So we set up a hierarchy of tests. Starting with motion, can you tell if there's something's moving? The direction of motion, can you tell which way it's going? Live action, so that's the same thing as direction, but we have a technician actually do it. So instead of it being a computer generated image, it's a real action by a human being. Because when you move your arm up and down, it looks different than what a computer generated image moving up and down. It's got, it's sort of an arc, or sideways. It looks sort of like, I don't know, an accordion or something. We want to see whether they could see things in their real lives. And then object detection, excuse me, is what you think. We did mostly fruits and vegetables and shapes. Okay, so just go through this quickly. So same color code and baseline before treatment, is in blue, so this was motion. You can't see it, but motion, direction of motion, live action, and then object detection. And if the patient is just guessing and they can't see anything, it's going to be at 50%. So you can see that patients really, really can't see this. Okay, and the ones where there's nothing, it's because we couldn't even get through a block of 10. you know, after like one of the patients, I was showing him a bar moving to the left or to the right. And, you know, he said, like, I can't, you know, he presses whatever he thinks he sees. He said, Sheila, I can't even tell that there's a bar there at all. So we didn't torture him and we keep doing it because it's hours and hours of testing, and the patients are so amazingly helpful, and they're really partners in the trial. I don't think of them as patients, I think of them as partners. Okay, so nobody can really do this, similar to the light sensitivity, but you can see after treatment, it's really different. Everyone was able to see motion. Several of them could detect the direction of motion, and most of them could do the live action too. No one so far was able to see objects, but remember, we're still at the lower doses, so there's a lot to look forward to. Okay, so now I wanted to raise another point. So these results were with patients with very advanced blindness, but what about patients who are in slightly earlier stage? So we had 2 patients like that. They had vision worse than 2400, meaning they can't see anything on the top line of an eye chart is 2200. But they had some ability to count fingers. I mean, some ability, if you stand really close to them a little bit, they could see this. I'll show you that in a second. And so the question was, oops, wrong gadget. How will this treatment work on them? Might they even benefit from the transducer alone? So let me tell you what I was thinking. When the patient's really blind, they can't produce any neurally coded output on their own. So they need the whole thing. They need the encoder and they need the transducer. But if they have a little bit of residual circuitry, then maybe they can generate the neural code a little bit on their own. There's some processing. And we use the transducer as a booster to let their own neural code get through. It was an idea, but I think it's working. So let me show you. Okay. So this is just saying these are results with a slightly earlier stage disease. So we're checking finger counting, detecting motion, detecting the direction of motion, and recognizing objects. So here's the patient. This is percent correct and distance when we're doing finger count. And she really, you know, she's at 20% of finger count. She was slightly more able to see finger count from far away because she had a tiny patch of her eye. And if you're far enough away, she could see the 2 fingers in it. If you're too close, she couldn't see it at all. After treatment, it all levels out. She can do it at any distance. Then down here, can you pause for 1 second on the typing so I can just show the bottom of this? Oh, who's typing? Oh, that was what the hell my boyfriend needs to say that when he needs to shut me up. No, it goes up. Okay, so here it's motion, direction, and objects. Okay, so she could see motion, but she couldn't tell at all the direction of the motion, and she couldn't see objects at all. Okay, so after treatment, I'm sorry that I blamed you. You were typing, so I assumed it was you. Afterwards, she could see direction of motion and she could see objects. And well, let me show you the second one too, the next patient. It's not advancing. Anyone, is it possible to advance it from behind? Where do I point? Okay. Okay, well, so this is very similar results here. The patient is much better on finger counting. She could see direction of motion, but no objects, but now she can see them. And what was interesting is that let me see what it says on the side. Oh yeah, finger counting improved and the patient gained the ability to recognize objects. So I mean, seriously, that when we flash it on in baseline, they can tell that you flash something on, but there's no ability to recognize it. Now they can tell you what it was. And I'll come back to this a little later, but they would call it out. They would say broccoli, banana. I mean, it was pretty amazing. And you know, I'm so paranoid of overstating the case. So I'm going to knock wood and everything because I don't want to be a blowhard in any way. Okay, so one other thing that happened was they could also detect color. We didn't expect this really. So this is a small improvement. This patient could see much more. And then recently we had a patient in from Poland last week, and he was very significantly improved in color from nothing to all three colors, particularly red. And these results were consistent with the patient's observations at home. So patient 109, this one, called me on the 4th of July and she said, my couch is red. She said, I thought it was black this whole time. She said the sunlight was streaming on it, and the bright sunlight activated the optogenetic gene, and suddenly she saw that her couch was red. She can also distinguish among her colored pills, red versus blue. And she could see the LEDs on her stove so that she could cook now. So these are significant quality of life issues. The guy that was here last week, he said a very similar story. He was in the shower, and when he came out of the shower, the bathroom light was landing on his towel, and he's like, my towel's red. So it was a very similar kind of story. Of course, when patients describe things that are very similar, the probability that this is real goes way up, that you're not deluding yourself. Okay, so I'm just about done. This is just to convey to you how it's done. So, these are the patients with the lowest dose, the next dose, the next dose. And now we've just started the highest dose. So that patient, you could see his red towel has just received, was our first patient with the highest dose. Okay, so let me just summarize then. So patients who received the lower doses, of the patients who received the lower doses, all the patients who started with complete or near complete blindness can now see light, even with the lowest doses, with some being able to see light at daylight or television levels. All these patients can now also detect motion, including 3 who can also detect the direction of motion, both with the computer-generated images and with live action. For the patients who received the higher doses, 2 of them were the 3rd highest and 1 was the very highest. 2 of the 3 patients tested have so far gained the ability to see objects and detect color. But I just mentioned there was a new patient, so it's actually 3 out of 4. And now I just want to thank all the people who participated in this and helped, the team, the clinical team, and my team. And thank you so much.
Oh, I get another picture. Great, fantastic. Good. So Dr. Nirenberg has graciously agreed to answer some questions. Does anyone have a question they'd like to ask? Okay, well, I'll start. So we see patients here with vision loss from a lot of different reasons. So just maybe once again, what type of a patient might benefit possibly from this type of treatment?
Okay, so this treatment is for retinal degenerative diseases. So the FDA requires you to start with a particular disease so that it's a homogeneous population, so your statistics are easier to unravel. So this is we did it with retinitis pigmentosa, RP. Oh, that was the dog. I was wondering what that was. But because it's not like standard gene therapy where you're going in and fixing a gene. We're just overriding it. We're reactivating the retina. So there's no reason that it wouldn't work for, again, knock on wood, for macular degeneration or for any retinal degenerative disease, choroidemia, Stargardt. So as long as it's safe, we will write the next clinical trial to go after these other populations too and see how broad a reach we can have.
Anyone else with a question? Well,
so you said it had a lasting effect. You know how long that is?
The only thing I know is no one knows really with optogenetics, but we had a patient come back. He was our very first one, injected right before COVID, right at the very start of COVID. And 2 years later, his light sensitivity hasn't changed. But he was the lowest dose, so he wasn't able to do a lot of things. But that's what we're hoping. We're also hoping that we can go to the other eye and do both eyes, because I promised that I would do everything in my power for the patients who've already been injected. They're clamoring to get their other eye injected with the higher dose because they donated themselves at a low dose. I feel like they should be first in line for the high dose for the other eye. So then we'll get more information on that.
Lisa Miller, did I see you hand up? Please. Okay, let's start with those two. Let's start with those two.
So I don't know the specifics of that disease to know whether this would work, but as long as the ganglion cells remain intact, it will be able to help. That's why it's not a good treatment for glaucoma, because that does affect the ganglion cells. So that's sort of the basic thing to ask. As long as the output cells are there and there's no other, obfuscation that would block the signals from getting in.
So let me answer Lisa's question in a different way.
Okay,
So this is for people who have lost vision.
right,
So this isn't for people who never had vision. Is that right?
right. So it doesn't mean that it isn't for them. It's that with people who have lost vision, their brain has been, developed to be able to receive the information. They're used to getting the retina's code, these coded signals. Would it work on someone who is born blind? Probably, but it probably would be, they might have to learn and get the hang of seeing. So it'd be so utterly fascinating to do that, and I would love to be able to help.
And then your other question was, when is this going to be more available?
Well, we have enough virus to do 20 more patients, and then we have to go into a phase 3, which is a little bit of a longer process. So it's still a few years. We're working as fast as we can, and I don't know the answer. It'll still be a few years.
So this will be investigational for a while, and hopefully at some point in time there'll be enough data, enough experience that you could find the FDA greater availability.
Right, and the fact that the side effects are very minimal. Like basically there are no side effects. I'm going to knock wood really hard there. When the patient doesn't experience anything, but the doctor can sometimes see that there's a little bit of inflammation, and they put them on prednisone drops, just prednisone drops. They get prednisone prophylactically, and then afterwards they get drops. But the patient themselves don't feel anything. So
I think we have time for one more question, please. Yeah, please.
well, we started the clinical trial. You mean the whole thing, or the? For a long time, because I was doing, I'm a neuroscientist, but I was not working on the project per se. I was just trying to understand how neurons communicate and what codes they use. And so one tiny thing, it won't take long, I promise, that when I cracked this code, and I realized if we can send this code up to the brain, that maybe we could and make people see, maybe we can also make robots see. So I started a second company where I'm using the neural code as the input to computer vision. And we've used it for a million things. So, face recognition and mobility and detecting emotions and lots of other things. And Intel, the chip company, bought it actually. So because I wanted to be able to focus on the clinical trial, but I partner with them. But the one thing I did when I sold it is I got permission to still use computer vision technologies to help blind people, because that way they don't have to wait till this is finally commercially available. What about people who are a little bit blind but could use these extra things like Javier was saying? So that there may be some machine vision things we can do in between, but it's based on the same principle.
Yeah, but I think this is a great example of someone who is doing basic science, just figure out how nerves work, how brains work, and then over time it evolves into something that potentially has great clinical applicability. So it's the progress of the whole career.
Thank you so much, everyone.
I want to thank Haben Girma, Javier Pita Lozano, and Dr. Sheila Nirenberg for joining us today and sharing their innovative and life-changing work that's helping people who are visually impaired to attain their goals. Events like these do not happen without the behind-the-scenes efforts of our Lighthouse skilled staff. I want to thank Fernanda Garcia Pina for her work that has made this day a success. I also wish to thank Michael Boyd and his team and the IT department for their efforts that allowed us to have these presentations here at the Tech Center. Finally, I want to thank you all for attending and making this most impactful of a program. I welcome everyone to the cafe on the 4th floor for lunch.